Hi everyone. In this final stage of the protest poetry collection, we're gonna try and get you to summarize what's been going on across the three anthology poems that you've been looking at so far, and we're also going to look into some purpose and try and figure out how to represent the author's purpose in some of its ins and outs. Um, the way that we're going to do this is I'm going to sort of model it. I'm going to show you how I've done it with a poem from this collection, Shailja Patel's Migritude. And then by understanding purpose and trying to look at purpose in some depth, I'm going to see if you can do what I do, which is basically write all of that out. Now, because you already have some context for London war photographer and remains, I thought I'd quickly give you some context here. This collection is based on the stories of a Kenyan woman of South Asian descent as well, who's um, talking about a history of saris and empire. It's about her clothes, it's about her culture sort of being passed down, and how she no longer feels as though she needs to be silent about all of that in the life that she lives and in the way that she chooses to represent that life. As we read this extract from the poem, I want you to think about three questions. What does she seem to dislike? How does she actually feel about it? And why does she feel like that? These are really going to guide the way that we try and figure out some of the purpose. Make it for everyone. Who's ever said you think too hard, you talk too much, you question more than you need to, you're too intense, too serious, you're too angry. Lighten up for Christ's sake. It's not like you have family in Iraq. Make it because you don't have health insurance. It flashes neon in your brain. Each time you take a fall in dance class, ride a road without a bike lane. Your close friend is 53. She has no health insurance. It would cost her $400 a month. When you think about health insurance, you remember Zari. Threads of beaten silver woven into saris so that in extremity a woman could burn her saris. Recover the molten silver. You wonder how it feels to touch a lighted match to your inheritance. Make it because Iraqis had free healthcare, one of the world's best before the US invasion. Now, children scream ceaselessly, 4 or 5 to a bed from the pain of sand parasites. For want of 3 cents worth of antibiotics, women give birth on the floor, in corners not packed with war victims. Make it for every morning you've ever opened your eyes to the luminous beauty of a lover's sleeping face, known with every cell of your body that life is joy. Make it for times you've prayed to die to silence, screams you can no longer bear to hear. Make it because you have never feared death, only the pain of living with eyes wide open. Make it with your body. Pain in your shoulders, numb and tingle of your carpal tunnel hands, ice in your toes, each morning chant of your feet laughter, of your hips on the dance floor conversation, of your pelvis with mortality. Now, at the end of this lesson, you're going to need to submit your annotations, your developed annotations for War Photographer Remains and for London. And then on top of that, you're also going to need to submit your purposes written out for all three of them. So in order to figure out that part, we're going to need to start with figuring out how we're going to develop those annotations, and then we're going to go into the writing. So if I look here, I want to find out what does she seem to dislike, and I want to get that into the annotations. Well, it seems as though there have been stresses about her health insurance. So maybe let's put that in. Probably the fact that you have to pay for it. That doesn't sound great. She dislikes the fact that there's been the US invasion. Dislikes the fact that women are giving birth on the floor. Dislikes the pain of living with eyes wide open. And I mean, that would do, to be honest, but there's loads of things that she doesn't like, right? Let's put losing her inheritance as well. It's a cultural inheritance, the saris and all of that. Yeah. So there we've got 5 things that she dislikes already. Now, if we keep moving that on, we want to go on to how does she actually feel about it. So how does she feel about health insurance? It's not just dislike. Dislike is sort of step 1. How do we take that a bit further? I think in a lot of these dislikes, actually, there's a sense of injustice. As in, like, there's something wrong with the way the world works. And it's like a moral wrongness. It says there's a sense of loss in terms of losing her cultural inheritance. So sense of is a really good bit of phrasing, because like, how does it feel? What sort of emotions come up? She says, before the US invasion, now children scream ceaselessly 4 or 5 to a bed from the pain of sand parasites. So, US invasion, maybe there's like not much care for children and the vulnerable. I wonder what sense that gives off. A sense of dehumanization, perhaps. I'm sure there'll be other things as well. Poor birthing conditions, a sense of injustice coming up again. I think that keeps coming up. So ones that keep repeatedly coming up as well are good ones to mention in your analysis of the purpose. The pain of living with eyes wide open feels like sort of afraid. Yeah? And then if we take that and we want to make it more, why does she feel like that, which is our third question, then we need to start thinking about, okay, so she probably feels like we shouldn't have to pay for our healthcare. People are already horrified. Well, people are already distraught in terrible circumstances. Losing healthcare or not having healthcare makes everything more difficult. Saying losing her cultural inheritance is that sense of loss. And why does she feel that sense of loss? Because she's losing a culture that was passed down through families simply because of the temporary need for money. Why does she feel like she doesn't like the US invasion? Not much care for children and the vulnerable. There's a sense of dehumanization, a sense of injustice. It's also like she mentions the 3 cents worth of antibiotics. It's like very serious problems that are potentially easy to solve are ignored. And that's probably why she feels like that. So she's criticizing that there. Why does she feel this sense of injustice? Like, we could keep going with these, right? But you don't need to get into this much depth because you're going to be looking at 3 poems and trying to do this with all 3 of them. Now, in writing it up, all I've tried to do here is summarize what we've got in those notes and try to link those ideas across. So I've got Shailja Patel criticizes the US invasion in Iraq, the living conditions in war-torn countries, and the difficulties of being surrounded by violence and destruction. A summary of the key dislikes. Not only is there a constant sense of injustice running throughout the making, but she also seems to portray a sense of fear and loss that could be seen as beyond her control because of the scale of the issues she's dealing with. For those that are suffering, the lack of healthcare that she criticises simply makes life more difficult for them, strengthening this sense of injustice by representing the personal difficulties that so many have to live through. So basically just trying to clarify what's going on, mentioning the sense of that I was mentioning earlier, how the whole thing feels. She's particularly critical when referring to the 3 cents worth of antibiotics, explaining that all of these difficulties are cheap and easy to solve. Her criticism not only supports the victims of war, but it also displays her anger towards those in power in order to make their responsibility known to the reader. Really just bringing it to a close, summarizing what her criticisms are overall. So it's about critique more than anything else, trying to figure out what she dislikes and why, and explaining the feelings behind all of that as well. So just to outline and bring it all to a close, you are going to need to develop your annotations by answering these questions for each of the poems. That's those 3 questions there. Put them across all 3 of those poems. And then also write up the author's purposes and criticisms in the way that we've already done. At the end of the lesson, you need to submit your updated annotations for the 3 poems and your write-ups for their purposes. I've also got these images here just to help you think about things. The poems are there and an image related to the poem. You can just pause the video on any one of them if you want to have a look at those poems in some more depth here, or just with their images. So we've got here war photographer, and you might remember this image, and remains, talking about PTSD. All right, thank you very much.